Councilman Salvatore, you have the mic, sir.
Thank you, Council President. First, let me thank the body for convening tonight. I know folks want to spend time with their families. We're in the middle of summer. But when I asked that we convene this meeting, it was based on a lot of the concerns and fear that I'm hearing from my constituents, not only in the neighborhoods that I represent, but across the city. So again, I thank you for being here tonight. Now, public safety, we've talked a lot about over the last 2 years. And I think we can all agree that we need a comprehensive approach to addressing the violence and the crime that's happening in Providence. And it is true that we are seeing a nationwide trend going, quite frankly, in the wrong direction. However, we live in Providence. This is our city. And I'm not as concerned about the national headlines that we've been receiving, but I am very concerned about the regional headlines that we've been receiving. And they're not good. The way we do this, the way we address public safety, and I think it's been said and I'll repeat it, it has to be a collective effort. It has to be an effort of us as elected leaders. That's where it starts. It starts with us as elected leaders working with the mayor. And I wish the mayor was here tonight because we have to do this together as a team, as lifelong residents like Councilman Narducci, like others. We have to do this in collaboration with each other because if we're not all on the same page, folks, we're not going to make the progress that we need to make our constituents feel safe. You know, last week or 2 weeks ago, we passed an ordinance. You know, we talked about a lot about ATVs, and it was about safe streets. We all want safe streets in different ways. The ordinance that we all supported addressed it from an infrastructure perspective. But I can tell you a lot of the illegal activity that's happening on our streets relative to ATVs don't make my constituents or your constituents feel safe. So I think it's about time we did have a tough conversation about public safety, what this means comprehensively, and how we can tackle it together as elected leaders, as the community, as public safety experts. I'm going to address something briefly that has been talked a lot about in the press over the last several weeks, and that is the call for the state police to provide assistance. My dear colleagues, let me be crystal clear. Crystal clear. There is nothing, and I have great respect for our state police, but there is nothing that our state police can do that our men and women in the Providence Police Department cannot do already. We are a model department, as Colonel Clements indicated earlier, for the rest of the country. I've said this before publicly, and I'll say it again. We're not a perfect department. We're not. We could use additional training around various disciplines, but we are a model agency for the rest of the country to replicate. I do appreciate the fact that resources have been offered, and I think it's incumbent on us to have those conversations because we do need a cooling off period in Providence. The violence that we're witnessing should not be tolerated by anybody. We know folks who are victims of violence. Their families don't want it. They're not going to tolerate it, and we shouldn't either. And again, that's going to take the collective effort of a lot of folks in this room and in this building to mitigate it. Mr. President, I have a few questions relative to the comments that were made by the presenters. We heard that staffing is down. Can somebody elaborate on what that means when we say staffing is down and what is needed to run an effective department? Colonel, you indicated that you're looking for, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 3 to 5 academies?
So yes, thank you, Councilman. Staffing is down to 404. when you factor in, which is always the case, officers out on military, IOD, long-term sick, we're minus 36. So we're closer to 370. We are yearning, desperately need November 6th to come very quickly, because that's when the 70th Providence Police Recruit Academy graduates and will hit the street. They'll have 10 weeks of FTO training, and immediately, like even next week, we should start advertising, recruiting, very shortly thereafter, testing for the selection of the 71st Providence Police Academy. Because, you know, let me tell you, Councilman, Council President, this city, the psyche and the morale of the Providence Police Department has been damaged with comments that have been made, and the psyche and morale and police officers around this country. But I know we're different. We've all heard the same comments from everyone behind a microphone tonight. We're different here, and I think we're in danger of having a greater amount of officers leave the job, and our attrition level will be much higher than we've seen in the past. We're seeing that around the country. What I don't want to see is that happen here.
Follow-up question, Mr. President.
Yes, Councilman.
Colonel, how many IODs, current IODs, and members of your department who are eligible for retirement?
It's about 110 eligible to retire. I believe it's around 9 IODs. We have several out military. We have a few out suspended, as we spoke about, holding people accountable. And, you know, all those numbers combined is 36.
Can you provide the council with a number that you need to effectively carry out the community policing model that I know you embrace and that many members of the Providence City Council embrace?
Bare bones minimum, we should never go. The lowest number, 450. And the whole time that this command staff has been put in place, we've never had that number, and we've gotten it done. Bare bones minimum, 450. As an assessment was done many years ago, a department of this size to provide the service that we said we were going to do for this community should be closer to 500. Actually, the letter said, the document said 550 to 600. You know, we could be a great department. We'd have foot posts everywhere. And that's not in the form of warrior mentality policing. That's in the form of community engagement and problem solving in the community for quality of life issues that are important to residents in the city and the neighborhoods. That's what's important.
Moving on to firearms, recently within the last year in the neighborhood that Councilman Narducci and I represent, over 100 firearms were reported stolen. Can you state that any of those stolen firearms are attributable to the violence that we have seen? And by the way, let me go on the record to say this isn't recent violence. We had this problem in the fall too, specifically in our neighborhood. So can you say that any of the firearms that were stolen that are on the streets illegally, are any of those attributable to the violence that we're seeing recently?
Yes. So we had 2 large caches of firearms. That one was a false report that 53, I believe it was, firearms were stolen. That was a false report. And some of those firearms from that point in time have been recovered by the Providence Police and have been, the nexus has been connected with violence in this city, including recent violence. As well, there was a separate cache of firearms, about a dozen stolen, and some of those firearms have been connected with different groups in the city attributable to violence.
Thank you. Moving on to ATVs, and I'll keep this brief, Council President. Colonel Parry, you indicated that you need tools during your presentation. I don't think there's anything legislatively that the council can do. We passed 2 ordinances that were introduced over the last 6 years. We've been told by the department, if enforced properly, we would be able to take more ATVs off of the road. I know that we have confiscated as a city over 200, but that's been over the last 4.5 years. So my question to you is, what tools do you need to be effective at mitigating the ATV issue in Providence? And let me just also state that I've spoke with folks in the rider community. I know they're looking for a space, maybe in Providence, maybe outside of Providence, and that's a conversation that we should have. But again, reiterating what I mentioned earlier, we all supported a concept around safe streets from an infrastructure perspective. I can tell you that the elderly residents that I represent, the disabled residents who I represent, they're frustrated and they don't feel safe. So please tell the body what we need in terms of more resources and tools to curb the illegal ATV use on our local roads.
So I don't believe that legislatively there's any additional tools, if you will, or programs that exist anywhere in the country that are not here. This council passed some pretty aggressive ordinances that allowed us to forfeit and seize and destroy. It's complicated. I wish I could say, give me X and I'll end ATV and dirt bike activity on the streets, but there isn't one solution. Of course, people help, and I believe leveraging some resources that have been offered from the state police would help as well, but even that, they cannot come in here and stop the ATV riders. I'm not saying I'm throwing my hands up and there's nothing to do, but it's complicated. And yeah, the men and women have taken by far the most ATVs off the streets of Providence than anywhere in this state. And they've done it in a safe way, except for one incident, unfortunately. And no officer wants to go through what we went through and that particular officer a year ago. And so we need to look at different strategies that are being used across the country. And there are some in which we could leverage and start knocking this ridership that is illegally causing havoc and safety on our streets. I'm not going to come back next week and next month and say it's been resolved and there's no more ATVs driving on the streets. It's a continuous both challenge and effort to stop them from driving on the streets and causing so much public safety hazard for our residents. We haven't given up and we won't give up, but understand it's both dangerous for our officers and for the public when we try to intercept. But there are some strategies that we'll deploy, have deployed, and will continue to deploy to take the bikes and get them off our streets and arrest those people that are driving recklessly.
Mr. President, follow-up comment and question. I think it's fair to say, Commissioner, that this is not a Providence-specific issue.
That's correct.
We learned that the young woman who attacked the innocent mother and her daughter, although her daughter wasn't hurt, her daughter was attacked too. She should have never had to have witnessed that. But it is fair to say that this is not a Providence-specific issue, and we talked a lot about, or we've been talking a lot about bringing in or leveraging state police resources. What is our relationship with other local law enforcement departments? Are we working with neighboring cities and towns? And I'll be honest with you, I'm not looking for a political rhetoric or, pointing the finger. That's not going to accomplish anything. And I'm not saying that anybody in your department or in the city has, but I think it's about time we started working collaboratively with our neighbors on this issue, because I don't think it's a Providence-specific issue.
I agree, and I know the Colonel has some comments, so I'll defer to him as well. Look, we got a great relationship with our neighboring towns and cities. The Colonel probably more than I, but I was actively involved in the Police Chiefs Association. And that's where you build relationships. So whether it's Winquist or Gonzalez or, you know, whomever in these neighboring towns, okay, at the leader level, there's good relations. But more importantly, at the officer level, at the detective level, there's even a greater relationship that they can share information and they can put their resources together and prevent, combat, and hold people accountable with their criminal behavior. Can it be better? I don't know that it can be better because we, you know, this is a small city relatively, and they're in Johnston and they're in Cranston and Pawtucket and Central Falls, and we work collaboratively, in my opinion, with all of those departments.
Well, I hope that collaboration continues. Somebody was severely hurt last year, and I fear that it's going to happen again, if not worse, and it's going to be one of our neighbors. So again, I think there are conversations to be had with the rider community. I know what they're looking for, but the bottom line is we cannot allow these vehicles to travel in a very dense population on our local roads. It's dangerous. And I know that my constituents and the families that I represent are frustrated, and they.
Sorry.
I would just add.
I pressed the wrong button. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
Councilman, I would just add, we have a great relationship with our partners, neighboring local law enforcement. I've conferred with Colonel Manny from the Rhode Island State Police several times. I will say this for the record, nobody can address crime in their community or in an urban community like Providence in a compassionate way, in a community-oriented policing type of way. As it relates to the ATVs, that's a huge issue. And as I identified earlier, Philadelphia, Atlanta, San Jose, Washington, D.C., look it up. I mean, they're having massive issues. We do have strategies in place with the Rhode Island State Police. We'll be moving forward with them. I think they can be helpful with us on that front. But what I ask for, and look, I 1,000% support the good work of the men and women of the Providence Police Department, but we need support both before and after operations. I would tell you this job has become nearly impossible to do without criticism on the back end. And there's nothing in a book or training or in perfect fashion that you can take some of these ATVs and their riders who are reckless, lawless. We've seen it. We've heard about it off the street. The community is up in arms. We're up in arms over it. There is not a magic solution. We do have some strategies we're ready to employ going forward with our partners. It needs to be addressed, but more importantly than anything, the support, both up front and after. They're just reckless. And we've tried to have, there are so many young men and women that we've now seen, and we've tried to have positive conversations with them about operating in that manner on these streets. And we've seen several tragedies on the roadways with these young men and women. And it will continue unless we get a better handle on it.
Thank you, Colonel. And I'll just conclude by saying to the three gentlemen who are representing us on the public safety side, continue working with Cedric and his team. I know you will. Fighting violence with violence is not the solution. We all agree with that. And Cedric is, you know, somebody who has made himself accessible to every neighborhood in Providence. And I think the resources that he provides is a wonderful opportunity, I think, to curb some of the violence that we've been seeing.
Thank you, Councilman.